fits you perfectly, you old woman." Brianna's voice sliced through the elegant dining room like a blade, each word dripping with contempt. The family attorney's papers lay spread across the polished mahogany table between us, the black and white text spelling out my future in cruel, definitive terms. I felt every one of my 55 years in that moment, the weight of them pressing down on my shoulders as I sat across from my son Daniel and his wife. He wouldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on his hands folded neatly in his lap. The silence that followed Brianna's outburst was suffocating, broken only by the distant ticking of Richard's grandfather clock in the hallway. Richard, my husband of 30 years, gone 3 years now. The reading of his final will had brought us to this moment, this humiliation. Daniel and Brianna Prescott shall inherit the Miami beachfront penthouse property, valued at approximately $4 million. The attorney had read, his voice clinical and detached. And then, Lillian Prescott shall inherit the cabin property located in the Blue Ridge Mountains near Asheville, North Carolina. That's when Brianna's perfect mask had slipped, revealing the cruelty that had been simmering beneath the surface since the day she married my son. I could still hear the laughter in her voice, see the curl of her lip as she dismissed my inheritance. A shack in the woods, no central heating, creaky floors. Her manicured finger jabbed at the air between us. It fits you perfectly, Lillian. Outdated, fragile, lonely, just like you. Now, as the attorney gathered his papers with uncomfortable haste, I searched Daniel's face for any sign of the boy I raised, the one who once made me Mother's Day cards with crayon hearts and promises of forever love. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who sat silent while his wife tore into the woman who had given him life. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice betraying me with a slight crack. "Is this what your father wanted?" He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine for just a moment before darting away. "Mom, please don't make this harder. Dad knew what he was doing." "Of course he did," Brianna interjected, smoothing her silk blouse with practiced elegance. "Richard knew exactly who deserved what. You'll be fine in that little cabin, Lillian. It's quaint, perfect for someone in your position, my position. 3 years of living in their spare bedroom after Richard died. 3 years of babysitting their children, cooking their meals, keeping myself small and unobtrusive while they built their life in the home I once shared with my husband." The attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Prescott, there are some additional documents regarding the cabin property that we can handle those later," Brianna cut in, rising to her feet. "I'm sure Lillian needs time to process everything, and we have that charity gala tonight." I nodded numbly, not trusting myself to speak. The charity gala. Another evening where Brianna would parade around in designer clothes, introducing Daniel as the promising young investment banker, while I sat at the corner table in my department store dress. The aging mother-in-law kept around out of obligation, but not anymore. My suitcases were already packed, sitting by the front door where Brianna had placed them that morning. "Just in case," she'd said with that same practiced smile. "You might want to see your new place right away." The attorney handed me a set of keys, his eyes filled with a pity that burned worse than Brianna's contempt. "The cabin has been maintained, Mrs. Prescott. Your husband made sure of that." "Thank you," I managed, clutching the cold metal in my palm. As they all rose to leave, Brianna placed a hand on my shoulder, her red nails digging slightly into the fabric of my cardigan. "Don't worry about coming back for anything else. I'll have your remaining things shipped to you. It's better this way, don't you think?" A clean break. A clean break. As if 30 years of marriage, of building a life with Richard, of raising Daniel, could be boxed up and shipped away like unwanted furniture. Outside, the taxi Richard's attorney had called for me waited in the circular driveway. I watched as Daniel helped the driver load my suitcases into the trunk, his movements efficient and detached. When he turned to me, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or shame, but it was quickly extinguished. "Mom," he began, his voice lowered so Brianna couldn't hear from the doorway. "I'm sorry about how this turned out. Dad had his reasons, I'm sure." "What happened to you, Daniel?" I asked, the words escaping before I could stop them. "When did I become someone you could just discard?" He flinched, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Richard's that it made my heart ache. "It's not like that. The cabin is in a beautiful area. You always said you wanted peace and quiet." "Peace and quiet," I repeated. "Not exile." "Mrs. Prescott, we should get going if you want to reach the cabin before dark," the driver called, already behind the wheel. With one last look at the home I'd once shared with Richard At the son who couldn't meet my eyes, I climbed into the back seat of the taxi. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Brianna in the doorway, her arm around Daniel's waist, her smile triumphant. 3 hours later, as the taxi wound its way up the mountain road, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window. The attorney had given me a sealed envelope along with the keys, but I hadn't found the courage to open it yet. What more could Richard possibly have to say to me now? The driver cleared his throat. "Almost there, ma'am. Just around this bend." I straightened, wiping away a tear I hadn't realized I'd shed. The road curved sharply, and suddenly, there it was. The cabin Richard had left me. Nestled among towering pines, its stone chimney rising against the backdrop of the Blue Ridge Mountains, it stood as a silent sentinel in the fading light of day. It wasn't the dilapidated shack Brianna had described. Even in the growing twilight, I could see the well-maintained cedar siding, the wide front porch with its swing, the carefully tended flower beds now dormant in the late fall chill. As the taxi rolled to a stop, I felt something stir within me. A fragile spark of curiosity, perhaps, or the first faint flicker of hope. "Looks like someone's expecting you," the driver said, nodding toward the porch. I followed his gaze and saw a single lantern glowing by the front door, casting a warm circle of light in the gathering darkness. Beside it sat a wicker basket covered with a checkered cloth. For the first time since the reading of the will, I felt the corners of my mouth turn upward in the ghost of a smile. "Welcome home," I whispered to myself, reaching for the door handle and stepping into the unknown. The cabin door creaked softly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the stillness of the mountain evening. I expected darkness, dust, and neglect, the abandoned refuge Brianna had so cruelly described. Instead, warm golden light spilled from a table lamp in the corner, illuminating a space that took my breath away. Polished hardwood floors gleamed under my feet. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, already laid with logs and kindling, waiting only for a match. The furniture was simple but elegant. A comfortable-looking sofa draped with hand-woven blankets, 2 reading chairs positioned near the windows, and built-in bookshelves filled with volumes I recognized from Richard's collection. This was no forgotten shack. This was a home, lovingly maintained and prepared. I set down my handbag and ventured further inside, my fingertips trailing over surfaces that bore no dust. In the small kitchen area, copper pots hung from a ceiling rack, and a kettle sat ready on the stove. The refrigerator hummed quietly, and when I opened it, I found it stocked with essentials: milk, eggs, butter, and a covered dish with a note that read, "Beef stew, heat thoroughly. Henry." Who was Henry? And why had he prepared food for my arrival? My gaze fell on the basket I'd brought in from the porch. Lifting the checkered cloth, I discovered a loaf of fresh bread, a jar of honey, and an envelope addressed to Lillian in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a simple note: "Welcome to Ashwood Cabin. I was Richard's caretaker for this property for the last 15 years. He asked me to make sure everything was ready for you. I'm just down the path if you need anything. Henry Dawson." 15 years. Richard had maintained this place for 15 years without ever mentioning it to me. Why the secrecy? What else hadn't he shared? I moved to the living room windows, drawing back the curtains to reveal a breathtaking view of the valley below, now bathed in moonlight. The mountains rose like sentinels in the distance, their silhouettes dark against the star-filled sky. Despite everything, the shock, the hurt, the humiliation, I felt something inside me respond to the beauty before me. A sound from outside startled me, footsteps on the porch. I tensed, suddenly aware of my isolation, but a gentle knock followed. "Mrs. Prescott, it's Henry Dawson. Just checking to make sure you found everything all right." I opened the door to find a man in his 60s, with weathered features and kind eyes, standing with a lantern in hand. "Mr. Dawson, thank you for the food and your note. Call me Henry, please." He shifted, his weight seeming hesitant. "Richard spoke very highly of you. Said you were the strongest woman he'd ever known." The unexpected praise from my late husband brought a lump to my throat. "Did he come here often?" Henry nodded. "More so in the last few years. Especially in the months before he passed. He was getting everything in order." "In order for what?" Henry's eyes softened. "I think that's for you to discover. Richard left some things for you to find. Said you'd know what to do with them when the time came." He gestured toward the cabin. "There's something under the loose floorboard in the kitchen. 3rd plank from the refrigerator." My heart began to race. "What is it?" "Not my place to say, ma'am." Richard was clear about that, but I think you'll want to take a look before you make any decisions about your future. He tipped his hat slightly. I'll leave you to it. My cabin's just 5 minutes down the path if you need anything. After Henry left, I stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the floor. Third plank from the refrigerator. What could Richard possibly have hidden there? And why? With trembling hands, I knelt and ran my fingers along the edge of the plank. It shifted slightly, and I managed to pry it up, revealing a small space beneath. Inside lay a metal box, the kind Richard had always used for his most important documents. I lifted it out, surprised by its weight, and carried it to the kitchen table. No key was visible, but I remembered the set the attorney had given me. The smallest key fit perfectly, and the lock turned with a soft click. Inside, I found a manila folder containing several documents, a small velvet pouch, and an envelope with my name written in Richard's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, unfolding the pages covered in his bold script. My dearest Lillian, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered Ashwood Cabin, the place that once saved my life, and that I hope will now save yours. Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away, determined to read on. You're wondering why I never told you about this place, why I left it to you instead of the penthouse Daniel and Brianna coveted so badly. The truth is, this cabin holds far more value than they could ever imagine, but only if it's in the right hands. Your hands. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the tide of emotions. The cabin belonged to Rose Dawson, Henry's mother, who took me in when I was just a broke kid with big dreams. She believed in me when no one else did, lent me the money to start our first business, and asked for nothing in return except a promise that I would use my success to help others as she had helped me. I remembered now. Richard had mentioned Rose occasionally, always, with deep respect, but I'd assumed she was a distant relative or former teacher, not someone so pivotal to his success. What Daniel and Brianna don't know, what no one knows except Henry and now you, is that this worthless cabin sits on land containing one of the largest lithium deposits in the region. The geological surveys are in the folder, along with the mineral rights documentation that is now in your name alone. My hands fumbled with the folder, pulling out official-looking papers with maps and technical data I barely understood. But the figures at the bottom of one document were clear enough. An estimated value of $50–70 million for the mineral rights alone. I gasped, the papers slipping from my fingers and scattering across the table. I've watched how Brianna has treated you these past few years, Richard's letter continued. How Daniel has failed to stand up for you. I saw the writing on the wall long before my diagnosis, and I knew I couldn't leave you vulnerable to their care once I was gone. The tears came freely now, streaming down my cheeks as I read my husband's final message to me. This is your chance for independence, Lily. Your opportunity to reclaim the dreams you set aside to raise our son and support my career. But I ask one thing of you. Remember Rose's example. Use this wealth not just for yourself, but to help others who have been dismissed or devalued as you were. I reached for the velvet pouch, tipping its contents into my palm. An emerald ring gleamed in the lamplight, antique, set in delicate gold filigree. This was Rose's ring. She called it her dignity ring, a reminder that true worth isn't in what others think of you, but in how you live your values. It belongs to you now. As I slipped the ring onto my finger, a perfect fit, I felt something shift inside me, a straightening of my spine, a lifting of my chin. Tomorrow, Brianna's smug smile will vanish when she learns the truth, I whispered to the empty room. But that's not what matters most. What mattered was the path forward, one I would walk with my head held high, carrying both Richard's legacy and my own newfound strength. I slept fitfully that night, Richard's letter tucked beneath my pillow like a talisman. Dawn broke with ribbons of gold and amber stretching across the mountain vista, pulling me from dreams filled with emerald rings and hidden treasures. For a moment I lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling and the chorus of birdsong outside my window, so different from the muted traffic sounds of Daniel and Brianna's neighborhood. Then reality rushed back. The will reading, Brianna's cruel words, the revelation hidden beneath the floorboards. I sat up, slipping Rose's ring onto my finger to reassure myself it wasn't just a dream. The emerald caught the morning light, sending small green flares dancing across the quilt. $50–70 million. The number was incomprehensible, like trying to count stars in the night sky. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Daniel. Mom, hope you arrived safely. Brianna and I want to check on you. We're thinking of driving up this weekend to see the cabin. Let us know if you need anything sent from the house. I stared at the message, reading between its carefully constructed lines. They wanted to see the cabin. Of course they did. Brianna had likely spent the night wondering if she'd made a tactical error, if there was something about this property she'd overlooked. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Henry stood on the porch with a thermos and a brown paper bag. Morning, Mrs. Prescott. Thought you might appreciate some coffee and muffins. My wife Jane bakes them fresh every morning. That's very kind. Thank you. I accepted his offerings, suddenly aware I was still in my nightgown with a robe hastily thrown over it. And please, call me Lillian. He nodded, his gaze landing on Rose's ring. A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. You found Richard's letter, then? I did. I hesitated, still processing everything. Henry, I don't understand. If Richard knew about the lithium deposits all these years, why didn't he do anything with them? Why live modestly when we could have? Because of the promise he made to my mother, Henry said simply. She made him swear that the land would never be exploited during her lifetime. She loved these mountains too much. But she's gone now? 5 years ago. He looked out toward the valley, his expression distant. Richard came to the funeral. That's when he started making plans, getting the surveys done quietly, setting everything up. But then his illness came on so sudden, and well, he trailed off, turning back to me. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of, especially after he saw how things were going with your son and his wife. I felt a flush of shame, wondering how much Henry knew about my humiliating position in Daniel and Brianna's household. Richard told me a bit about your situation, Henry continued, as if reading my thoughts. Said it broke his heart to see you treated that way. That's why he was so determined to give you this fresh start. Fresh start. The words resonated within me, a concept I hadn't considered possible at 55. I don't even know where to begin, I admitted. These papers, the mineral rights, it's all so overwhelming. Henry smiled. Richard thought you might say that. That's why he set up a meeting for you with his attorney, the real one, not the one who handled the will reading. Man named James Harrington in Asheville. You've got an appointment at 2 o'clock today if you're up for it. The real attorney, of course. The family attorney who had presided over yesterday's humiliating scene had been just another part of Richard's elaborate plan, a misdirection to conceal what really mattered. I'll be there, I said, a newfound determination in my voice. After Henry left, I showered in the surprisingly modern bathroom, dressed in the most professional outfit I'd packed, and made a quick breakfast with the provisions Henry had brought. As I ate, I reread Richard's letter, absorbing details I'd missed in the emotional fog of the previous night. There's a small safe behind the painting in the bedroom, one paragraph noted. The combination is our anniversary date. Inside, you'll find some cash to, tide you over, and a key to a safety deposit box at Asheville First National. James will explain everything. I found the safe exactly where Richard described, containing an envelope with $5,000 and a small key. The thoughtfulness of his preparations brought fresh tears to my eyes. Even in death, he was caring for me, anticipating my needs. The drive to Asheville took 40 minutes, along winding mountain roads that revealed breathtaking vistas at every turn. I found myself slowing the rental car at particularly beautiful overlooks, drinking in the majesty of the landscape that was now, inconceivably, mine. Harrington and Associates occupied the top floor of a sleek building in downtown Asheville. As the elevator ascended, I caught my reflection in its polished doors, a woman I barely recognized. Something had changed overnight. My posture was straighter, my eyes clearer. Rose's ring glinted on my finger, like a secret promise. James Harrington was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and keen blue eyes that assessed me thoughtfully as I entered his office. Mrs. Prescott, he greeted me, rising from behind an imposing desk. Richard spoke of you often and with great admiration. I'm honored to finally meet you, though I wish it were under happier circumstances. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I understand you were involved in Richard's arrangements? Please call me James. And yes, Richard and I worked closely over the past 2 years to structure everything properly. He gestured to a leather chair. Please, make yourself comfortable. We have much to discuss. Over the next hour, James laid out the full extent of Richard's planning. The geological surveys confirming the lithium deposits. The separate corporation he'd established in my name to manage the mineral rights. the trust fund he'd created to ensure I received income regardless of what decisions I made about the land. You have options, James explained, spreading maps across the desk. Several energy companies have already expressed interest in leasing the mineral rights, which would provide substantial income while leaving the land itself relatively undisturbed. Or you could sell outright, though Richard hoped you wouldn't go that route. My head spun with possibilities, numbers larger than I'd ever contemplated in my life. What would you recommend? I asked. James leaned back in his chair, studying me. Richard always said you had excellent judgment, Mrs. Prescott, that you understood the value of things beyond their price tag. What do you want to do with this opportunity? The question caught me off guard. For 3 years, no one had asked what I wanted. I'd become a fixture in my son's home, a convenience when needed, an inconvenience when not. I began, then stopped, surprised by the clarity of the vision forming in my mind. I want to honor Richard's memory and Rose's legacy. I want to help people who've been dismissed or devalued, as Richard put it. And I hesitated, then straightened in my chair. I want Daniel and Brianna to understand the consequences of their actions. James nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Richard would approve, I think, especially of that last part. He reached for a leather portfolio on his desk. He left instructions for various scenarios. This one might interest you. He handed me a document outlining the formation of a foundation, the Rose Prescott Foundation, dedicated to supporting women in transition, particularly those facing age discrimination or family abandonment. Richard drafted this as an option, not an obligation, James clarified, but he thought you might find it fitting. As I read through the mission statement, a sense of purpose bloomed within me, stronger than any I'd felt since Richard's death. This wasn't just about proving Brianna wrong or reclaiming my dignity. It was about creating meaning from the pain I'd endured. This is perfect, I said softly, then looked up at James with newfound resolve. And what about Daniel and Brianna's visit this weekend? How should I handle that? James's eyes twinkled with mischief I wouldn't have expected from such a distinguished attorney. Oh, I think we can arrange quite the educational experience for them, don't you? I spent the next 2 days preparing for Daniel and Brianna's visit with an energy I hadn't felt in years. With Henry's help, I stocked the kitchen with groceries, arranged fresh flowers on the tables, and built a playlist of Richard's favorite jazz albums to play on the cabin's surprisingly sophisticated sound system. You're going all out, Henry observed as he helped me carry firewood for the evening. Special occasion? I smiled, adjusting a vase of mountain wildflowers. You could say that. My son and daughter-in-law are coming to inspect their mother's humble inheritance. Henry chuckled. They're in for quite a surprise. That's the plan, I replied, surprising myself with the hint of mischief in my voice. By the way, I wondered if you and Jane might join us for dinner. I'd value the support. We'd be honored, Henry said. Jane's been curious about you since Richard first mentioned his plans. She'll be thrilled to finally meet you. I spent that afternoon baking Richard's favorite apple pie, the familiar motions of peeling and slicing grounding me amid the surreal circumstances of my new life. As I worked, my phone buzzed with another text from Daniel. Leaving now. ETA 6 p.m. Brianna's excited to see the place and help you. Get settled. I nearly laughed out loud at the transparent lie. Brianna excited to see the shack in the woods she'd mocked so cruelly? More likely, she was coming to assess what could be salvaged or sold. At 5:30, I changed into a simple but elegant navy dress I'd packed as an afterthought, applied a touch of makeup, and fastened a silver pendant Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary around my neck. Rose's emerald ring completed the ensemble, its deep green stone catching the late afternoon light as I moved around the cabin, making final preparations. Henry and Jane arrived first, Jane bringing a bottle of local wine and wrapping me in a warm hug as if we were old friends rather than new acquaintances. Richard spoke so fondly of you, she said, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. He'd be so pleased to see you here, making this place your own. We were chatting in the kitchen when the sound of tires on gravel announced Daniel and Brianna's arrival. Through the window, I watched their sleek BMW pull up beside my rental car, saw Brianna's expression of distaste as she emerged in impractical heels, surveying the rustic surroundings. Showtime, Henry muttered under his breath, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. I opened the front door before they could knock, greeting them with a composure that must have surprised them after yesterday's emotional departure. Daniel, Brianna, welcome to Ashwood Cabin. I'm so glad you could come. Daniel stepped forward awkwardly, giving me a stiff hug. Mom, you look different. Rested, I replied, with a smile. The mountain air agrees with me. Brianna hung back, her critical gaze sweeping over the cabin's exterior, clearly reassessing her previous dismissal. The well-maintained cedar siding, professional landscaping, an expansive deck with its stunning valley view didn't match her worthless shack narrative. It's quaint, she managed, the word dripping with faux sincerity. Much nicer than I expected. Thank you, I replied, ushering them inside where the aroma of apple pie and pot roast filled the air. I've prepared dinner. I hope you'll join us. Us? Daniel questioned, stopping short at the sight of Henry and Jane in the kitchen. Daniel, Brianna, these are my neighbors, Henry and Jane Dawson. Henry was Richard's caretaker for the cabin for many years. Confusion flickered across Brianna's face. Caretaker? I didn't realize the property required management. Oh, Richard was very particular about maintaining the cabin, Henry replied pleasantly. Been coming up here regularly for 15 years, making improvements, checking on the land. The land? Daniel echoed, his brow furrowing. What's special about the land? I gestured to the dining table, already set with Richard's mother's china I'd found carefully stored in the cabin's linen closet. Let's eat while it's hot. We can discuss the property afterward. Dinner proceeded with surface pleasantries, Brianna making a show of complimenting the rustic charm of the cabin while subtly probing for information. I deflected her questions with innocent smiles, steering the conversation toward Henry and Jane's stories about the local community. After dessert, as Jane helped me clear the plates, Brianna finally lost patience with the small talk. So, Lillian, she began, her tone falsely bright. Daniel and I have been thinking. This place is so isolated. We're concerned about you being up here all alone, especially in winter. That's thoughtful of you, I replied, pouring coffee into the bowl. Delicate cups I'd discovered in the kitchen cabinets. We thought perhaps it might make sense for you to sell this place, she continued, exchanging glances with Daniel. We could help you find a nice little apartment closer to us. Something more manageable. Manageable, I repeated, nodding thoughtfully as I returned to the table. You know, that's exactly what Richard and I discussed before. He passed. Daniel leaned forward, interest piqued. You and Dad talked about selling the cabin? Not exactly, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. We talked about what would be manageable for me after he was gone. About ensuring I'd never have to depend on anyone's charity again. I placed my left hand deliberately on the table, Rose's emerald ring catching the light. He was quite thorough in his planning. Brianna's eyes narrowed, fixing on the ring she'd never seen before. That's new? Was it in the cabin? In a manner of speaking. I smiled, then reached for a folder I'd placed on the sideboard. Before we discuss my future living arrangements, there's something you should know about this property. I slid the geological survey across the table, watching as Daniel picked it up, with mild curiosity that quickly transformed into focused attention. Mom, what is this? These figures can't be right. They are, actually, Henry interjected. 3 independent surveys confirmed it. One of the richest lithium deposits in the eastern United States, right under our feet. Brianna snatched the paper from Daniel, her eyes widening as she scanned the numbers. $50 to $70 million? That's impossible. Not impossible, I corrected gently. Just carefully concealed. Richard wanted to be absolutely certain before he made any decisions. Daniel's face had drained of color. Dad knew about this? He did. For years, apparently. He was waiting for the right time. I sipped my coffee calmly. The mineral rights are quite valuable, especially with the growing demand for lithium batteries. But, Brianna began, her voice rising slightly before she controlled it. But the property is part of the family estate. Surely Daniel has some claim to— He doesn't, I interrupted, my voice firm but not unkind. Richard established a separate corporation that holds the mineral rights, entirely in my name. It's all been verified by his attorney in Asheville, James Harrington. Perhaps you've heard of him? One of the top mineral rights attorneys in the state. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost see the calculations happening behind Brianna's eyes, the rapid recalibration of her attitude toward me, toward the worthless shack that had suddenly become the most valuable asset in Richard's estate. Mom, Daniel finally managed, his voice strained. Why didn't you tell us yesterday? I looked at my son, really looked at him, the boy I'd raised, the man who had stood by silently while his wife humiliated me, who had packed my suitcases and sent me away without protest. Would it have changed how you treated me? I asked softly. The shame that flickered across his face was answer enough. Money changes everything, doesn't it? I said, quietly, watching Brianna's face transform from shock to calculation. That's not fair, Mom, Daniel protested weakly. We didn't know. Would it have mattered? I repeated, meeting his gaze steadily. If you had known about the lithium deposits, would you have allowed your wife to humiliate me yesterday? Would you have packed my bags and put them by the door? The silence that followed was my answer. Henry cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Jane and I should probably head home. Thank you for dinner, Lillian. It was lovely. Of course, I said, rising to walk them to the door. Thank you both for everything. Once they were gone, I returned to find Brianna and Daniel in hushed, urgent conversation that abruptly ceased as I entered. Brianna's face had assumed a mask of contrition, her eyes suddenly soft and appealing. Lillian, she began, her voice honeyed in a way I'd never heard directed at me before. I can't tell you how sorry I am about yesterday. The stress of the will reading, the shock of it all. I said things I didn't mean. Did you? I asked, collecting the coffee cups with deliberate calm, because they seemed quite sincere at the time. We were all upset, Daniel interjected, shooting a warning glance at Brianna. Mom, this changes everything. You're set for life now. We should be celebrating, not rehashing yesterday. I set the cups in the sink and turned to face them both. You're right, Daniel. It does change everything, but not in the way you think. Brianna leaned forward, her smile bright and eager. We could help you negotiate with the mining companies. Daniel knows people in the energy sector. With his connections, I've already retained James Harrington to handle those negotiations, I interrupted. Richard trusted him, and so do I. But family should stick together on something this big, Brianna insisted, exchanging another glance with Daniel. We could form a partnership, pool our resources. Pool our, resources, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. You mean my resources? The ones you dismissed as worthless yesterday? Daniel stood abruptly. Mom, that's enough. We get it. We made a mistake, but we're still family. Dad would want us to work together. You think so? I moved to the bookshelf, pulling out a leather-bound album I'd discovered that morning. I found Richard's journal. He kept detailed notes about his visits here, about the plans he was making. I opened to a page marked with a silk ribbon. Here's an entry from last year. Watched Daniel stand by again today while Brianna belittled Lillian over dinner. He's become a shadow of himself around that woman. I fear for what will happen to Lily once I'm gone. Daniel paled, sinking back into his chair. He wrote, That? He saw everything, Daniel. The way you changed after you married Brianna, the way you allowed her to treat me. He was preparing for this moment long before he died. Brianna's facade cracked slightly, her voice taking on an edge. So, this is punishment? Richard left you a fortune to spite us? No, I replied calmly. He left me a choice, and I've made it. I handed them each a document. I'd prepared with James earlier that day. The incorporation papers for the Rose Prescott Foundation, with its mission statement clearly outlined. What's this? Daniel asked, skimming the pages. My decision. I'm converting most of the mineral rights into an endowment for a foundation supporting women who've been displaced or devalued by their families. Women like me. Brianna's face flushed with anger. You're giving it away? That's insane. You can't. I can, and I am, I said firmly. The foundation will ensure the land is responsibly managed, with minimal environmental impact. A portion of the proceeds will provide me with comfortable income for life. The rest will fund programs helping women rebuild their lives with dignity. This is ridiculous, Brianna snapped, mask fully discarded. Now, Daniel, say something. She's throwing away millions to prove a point. Daniel looked torn, caught between his wife's fury and his own shame. Mom, you should think about this. Take some time. I have thought about it, I replied. For the first time in 3 years, I've made a decision entirely for myself, and it feels right. I moved toward the front door, opening it to the star-filled night. It's getting late, and I have an early meeting with James tomorrow. You're welcome to stay in town, of course, but I think we're done here. You're kicking us out? Brianna's voice rose in disbelief. I'm saying goodnight, I corrected. And I'm setting boundaries. Something I should have done years ago. After they'd gone, their taillights disappearing down the mountain road, I stood on the porch breathing in the crisp night air. An unfamiliar lightness filled my chest. Not happiness exactly, but something adjacent to it. Relief, perhaps, or the first tentative steps toward whatever came after grief and humiliation. The cabin welcomed me back inside with its warm glow, and for the first time I saw it clearly, not as a consolation prize or a secret treasure trove, but as a sanctuary. A place where I could finally hear my own thoughts without Brianna's cutting commentary or Daniel's disappointed sighs. I moved through the rooms slowly, touching surfaces, looking at the books Richard had collected here, the artwork he'd chosen. In the bedroom, I found a framed photograph I hadn't noticed before. Richard and an elderly woman standing on this very porch, both smiling. Into the camera. Rose Dawson, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. "Thank you," I whispered to them both, to the empty room, to the cabin itself. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and sat on the porch swing watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "We're heading back to Miami. Brianna's upset. I need time to process all this. I hope you know what you're doing." I didn't reply. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like justification or anger. Instead, I drove to Asheville for my meeting with James, the windows down, the mountain air filling the car with the scent of pine and possibility. The Rose Prescott Foundation took shape over the following weeks, with James guiding me through the legal complexities and introducing me to experts in sustainable mineral extraction. We negotiated limited leases with companies committed to environmental protections, ensuring steady income without destroying the land Rose had loved. I discovered a talent for planning I'd never had the opportunity to exercise, for making decisions without second-guessing myself. Each morning I woke in the cabin, feeling more myself than I had in years, the weight of Daniel and Brianna's expectations lifting like morning fog from the valley below. Henry and Jane became true friends, introducing me to their circle in the mountain community. Artists, retirees, local business owners who welcomed me without questions or judgment. I joined a hiking group, attended community dinners, volunteered at the local library. Slowly, I built a life that was entirely my own. Daniel called occasionally, awkward conversations filled with weather updates and vague promises to visit. Brianna never spoke to me directly, a silence I found more peaceful than her previous false warmth. I didn't push for reconciliation, but I didn't close the door entirely either. Time would reveal whether there was anything worth salvaging in our relationship. 6 months after that fateful will reading, I stood on the steps of Asheville's newly renovated Women's Center, a building purchased with the foundation's first major expenditure. Beside me, James held an oversized pair of scissors, ready for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the small crowd gathered before us, "it is my honor to introduce the founder of the Rose Prescott Foundation, a woman whose vision and generosity have made this day possible, Lillian Prescott." As I stepped forward to grateful applause, I caught a familiar face at the back of the crowd. Daniel stood alone, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I cut the ribbon to cheers and camera flashes, then gave a brief speech about second chances and the power of community. Afterward, as I mingled with supporters and staff, Daniel approached hesitantly. "This is impressive, Mom," he said, gesturing to the building behind us. "Really impressive." "Thank you," I replied, studying his face. He looked older somehow, the confident sheen of his Miami life slightly tarnished. "I'm surprised to see you here. Brianna and I are—" He hesitated, taking some time apart. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, about Dad, about how he treated you." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was wrong." The words I'd waited months to hear. Yet they didn't bring the vindication I'd once imagined, just a quiet sadness for all the time we'd lost. "Would you like to see the center?" I asked, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology. "We've created some amazing programs." It was a small opening, nothing more. Whether it would lead to reconciliation or merely closure remained to be seen. But as we walked together into the building that bore Rose's name, I realized I was finally ready for either outcome. I was no longer defined by Daniel's approval or Brianna's disdain. I had found my own path, not despite their cruelty, but because of it. The cabin. That was meant to be my exile had become my salvation, and the humiliation that should have broken me had instead set me free. The Margaret Havens Transitional Housing Program is named after our first resident, I explained to Daniel as we toured the Rose Prescott Foundation's Women's Center. She was 73 when her son and daughter-in-law decided she was too much trouble and dropped Her at a nursing home without consultation. Now she helps new residents adjust. Daniel winced at the parallels, but followed me attentively as I showed him the communal kitchen where cooking classes were held, the computer lab where women learned job skills, the garden that provided both food and therapy. "How many women live here?" he asked, watching a small group gathered in the sunny common room. "Currently 12, with capacity for 20. We prioritize women over 50 who've been displaced by family circumstances." I led him to the administrative wing. But housing is just one aspect. We also offer legal support, financial counseling, and career training. In my office, a large map of Asheville was pinned to the wall, with colored markers indicating current and future foundation projects. Daniel studied it thoughtfully. "You've accomplished all this in 6 months? When you know exactly what women in these situations need, it's easier to create effective programs," I replied. The unspoken truth hung between us. I knew because I had lived it. He nodded, hands in pockets, looking more like the thoughtful boy I remembered than the polished banker he'd become. "And the, cabin? Are you still living there?" "I am. It's home now." I smiled, thinking of the morning sunrise viewed from my porch swing. "I've made some renovations, solar panels, updated heating system, a proper office, but it's still the quiet sanctuary Richard intended." An awkward silence fell. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, about Brianna and me. The separation. It wasn't just about you, though. That was part of it. After the will reading, after seeing how Dad had planned everything, I started noticing patterns in my own life, how I'd stopped making decisions, how everything revolved around Brianna's preferences, her social calendar, her ambitions. That happens gradually," I said gently. "You don't notice until someone holds up a mirror." He nodded. The cabin was my mirror, seeing how much thought Dad put into protecting you, into giving you a fresh start. It made me realize he saw something I'd been blind to, something about myself, about my marriage. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I gestured to the chairs by the window. "Would you like some coffee? We have time before the board meeting." As we sat with steaming mugs, Daniel asked the question I'd been expecting. "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" I considered my answer carefully. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Daniel. It's a process. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, but it needs to be different than before, based on mutual respect, not obligation. "That's fair," he said, looking down at his hands. "More than fair, considering. What will you do now? About your marriage, your work in Miami?" He shrugged. "I've taken a leave of absence from the firm. I'm staying in a rental in Asheville for a while, trying to figure things out. Brianna is, well, she's not happy about any of it. She's threatening all sorts of legal action over the separation." I wasn't surprised. Brianna had always viewed relationships as transactions, assets to be leveraged. "I know a good attorney if you need one," I offered, thinking of James. Daniel smiled weakly. "I might take you up on that." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. James entered, elegant as always in his tailored suit, carrying a leather portfolio. "Sorry to interrupt, Lillian, but the board members are arriving and there's a matter we should discuss before the meeting." He nodded, politely to Daniel. "Good to see you again, Mr. Prescott." Daniel rose. "I should go. Thanks for the tour, Mom. It's really impressive what you've created here." After he left, James raised an eyebrow. "Reconciliation?" "Baby steps," I replied. "What did you need to discuss?" He laid out several documents on my desk. "We've received another offer from Horizon Energy, substantially higher than before, with additional environmental protections." He named a figure that made me blink. "They're quite persistent. And generous," I acknowledged, "but our current arrangements are working well. The foundation has stable funding without excessive extraction." "Absolutely," James agreed. "I just wanted you to have all the information before the meeting." He studied me with approval. "Richard would be proud, you know, of everything you've built, of how you've handled yourself through all this." The board meeting proceeded smoothly, with updates on current programs and proposals for expansion. We had attracted respected community leaders and experts in women's advocacy, people who shared the vision of supporting women through life transitions with dignity and practical assistance. Afterward, I found Daniel waiting in the lobby, examining photographs of our first group of residents on their moving-in day. "I was wondering," he said hesitantly, "if you're free for dinner. There's more I'd like to talk about." We ate at a small farm-to-table restaurant in downtown Asheville, the awkwardness between us gradually easing as we shared memories of Richard that had nothing to do with wills or inheritances. Do you remember how he used to make Sunday pancakes? Daniel asked, smiling. With those ridiculous shapes he claimed were animals? I laughed. And we all had to guess what they were supposed to be. That lopsided circle with 2 bumps he swore was a perfect elephant. I miss him, Daniel said simply. I should have appreciated him more, both of you. As our plates were cleared, he reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. I brought something, a peace offering, I guess. He slid it across the table. It's the deed to the Miami penthouse. I want to transfer it to the foundation. I stared at him in surprise. Daniel, that's a $4 million property. I know. And I know it won't make up for how I treated you. But maybe it can help. More women like Margaret Havens. He shrugged, almost shy. It's what Dad would want. I studied my son's face, seeing sincerity in his eyes that had been absent for too long. The foundation would certainly put it to good use. But are you sure? It's your home. It's Brianna's showcase, he corrected. It was never really home. And I'm discovering I care a lot less about granite countertops and ocean views than I thought I did. I accepted the envelope, touched by the gesture beyond what I could express. Thank you. This will make a tremendous difference. As we walked back to our cars, the spring evening warm around us, Daniel asked, would it be okay if I visited the cabin sometime? I'd like to see what Dad loved about it, what you've done with the place. I'd like that, I said, meaning it. This weekend, perhaps? Henry and Jane usually come for Saturday dinner. You'd like them? He nodded, something like relief softening his features. I'll be there. Driving back to the cabin that night, winding through the dark mountain roads now familiar and comforting, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd arrived broken and humiliated, expelled from my son's life with cruel words still ringing in my ears. Now I returned as the founder of a growing foundation, reconnecting with my son on new, more equal terms. The cabin welcomed me with its warm lights, set on timers I'd installed during the renovations. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and poured a small glass of wine, carrying it out to the deck where I'd added comfortable seating. Perfect for stargazing. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Havens. Board meeting went well? Women asking when you're teaching the financial literacy workshop again? I smiled, typing back confirmation for next week's session. Teaching those workshops had become one of my favorite responsibilities, sharing practical knowledge while watching confidence bloom in women who'd been told they, weren't capable of managing money. Another text arrived, this one from Henry. Jane baking special dessert for Saturday. Your son joining us? Yes, I replied, looking forward to it. Later, as I prepared for bed, I caught sight of Rose's emerald ring on my finger, now a familiar weight. I thought of the woman I'd never met, whose legacy had shaped my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Of Richard, who had seen what I needed when I couldn't see it myself. Of the broken, humiliated woman who had arrived at this cabin 6 months ago, and the person I had become since. In the mirror, I saw gray hair I no longer felt compelled to color, lines that spoke of both sorrow and laughter, eyes that had regained their spark. Not young, certainly, but vital. Present, purposeful. Outdated, fragile, lonely, Brianna had sneered. How little she had understood about the strength that comes from rebuilding yourself after devastation, about the wisdom earned through loss, about the depth of connection possible when it's based on genuine respect rather than convenience or obligation. I slept soundly that night, wrapped in the quiet of the mountains, at peace with both my past and my future, a peace I owed, ironically, to the very people who had tried to diminish me. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as rejection. Sometimes being cast out is the beginning of finding your way home. Autumn painted the Blue Ridge Mountains in spectacular hues of crimson and gold as I prepared the cabin for Daniel's first visit. 6 months had passed since our dinner in Asheville, and, in that time, our relationship had begun a cautious rebuilding through weekly phone calls and occasional meetings at the foundation. I moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, preparing Richard's beef stew recipe, Daniel's favorite as a child. Henry had dropped off fresh-baked bread earlier, and Jane's apple pie cooled on the counter. The dining table was set with Rose's china, a bottle of wine breathing beside it. The cabin had evolved significantly since my arrival. What was once a temporary refuge had become a true home, reflecting both Richard's tastes and my own emerging preferences. I'd converted one bedroom into an office where I managed foundation business, added a sunroom perfect for morning yoga, and expanded the deck to better showcase the breathtaking views. A soft chime from my phone announced a text from Daniel. About 15 minutes away. Bringing someone, if that's okay. Important to me. I hesitated, wondering if he'd reconciled with Brianna despite the divorce proceedings James was helping him navigate. But I texted back a simple, "Of course," and added another place setting, determined to remain gracious regardless of who accompanied him. Exactly 15 minutes. Later, tires crunched on the gravel driveway. I watched through the window as Daniel helped an elegant older woman from his car. Not Brianna, but someone I didn't recognize. They retrieved overnight bags from the trunk and made their way toward the cabin, Daniel's hand supportively at the woman's elbow. I opened the door before they reached it, greeting them with a genuine smile. "Welcome to Ashwood Cabin." "Mom," Daniel said, looking slightly nervous. "This is Dr. Eleanor Winters." "Elle, this is my mother, Lillian Prescott." Dr. Winters offered her hand with a warm smile. "I've heard so much about you, Lillian. Your foundation work is remarkable." "Thank you," I replied, noting her firm handshake and direct gaze. "Please, come in. Dinner's almost ready." As they settled in the living room, I brought drinks and observed their interaction. There was an easy comfort between them, a mutual respect evident in small gestures and shared glances. Daniel seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "Elle is a psychology professor at Asheville University," Daniel explained. "We met at a foundation fundraiser 3 months ago. She's been helping design the counseling program for new residents, which has been fascinating work," Eleanor added. "The foundation's approach to trauma recovery is quite innovative." Over dinner, joined by Henry and Jane, conversation flowed naturally. Eleanor spoke thoughtfully about her research on women's resilience following major life disruptions. Daniel shared updates on his new consulting business in Asheville, and Henry entertained us with local history. I watched my son, noting how he listened attentively to Eleanor's perspectives, how he developed a genuine interest in the foundation's mission. After dessert, as Henry and Jane said their goodbyes and Eleanor excused herself to make a phone call, Daniel helped me clear the dishes. "Elle is quite wonderful," I said quietly, handing him a plate to dry. He nodded, a gentle smile softening his features. "She is. After Brianna, I didn't think I'd want another relationship, but Elle is different. She sees me, not what I can provide. She challenges me to be better." "I'm happy for you," I said, meaning it completely. Daniel set down the towel, turning to face me. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. I've been offered a position at Asheville Community College, teaching finance courses. It's not as prestigious as banking in Miami, but it feels right." "You're moving here permanently?" "I am. I've already found a small house near the college." He hesitated. "I thought maybe we could see each other regularly. Sunday dinners, maybe? If you'd like that." The simple invitation carried the weight of profound change, an acknowledgement of my independent life, a request for connection rather than an assumption of availability. "I'd like that very much," I replied. Later that evening, as Eleanor and Daniel settled into the guest room I'd prepared, I sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea, listening to the night sounds of the mountains. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, its haunting cry echoing through the trees. Stars crowded the sky, brilliant against the black velvet backdrop. My phone chimed with an email notification from James. The Miami penthouse had finally sold, the proceeds transferred to the foundation's housing expansion fund. Another chapter closed. The money would help establish a second residence facility, this one focused on women with children, offering safe transition from abusive situations. The foundation had grown beyond my initial vision, attracting supporters and volunteers who believed in its mission. We'd helped 27 women find new beginnings so far, with many more on our waiting list. What had started as Richard's protective gesture had blossomed into something that was changing lives across the community. I thought of Brianna, who'd relocated to Los Angeles after the divorce was finalized, according to Daniel. She had fought viciously for the penthouse until the very end, never understanding that Daniel's decision to donate it represented something money couldn't buy, his reclamation of his own values. The following morning, I took Daniel and Eleanor on a tour of the property, showing them the hiking trails Richard had carefully mapped, the small lake stocked with trout, the wildflower meadow that bloomed spectacularly in spring. "Dad never mentioned any of this," Daniel said, gazing across the valley from our vantage point on a rocky outcropping. "All those years he had this secret paradise. I think he wanted to protect it," I replied. "Not just the land, but what it represented. A place untouched by status or competition. Somewhere authentic." Eleanor nodded, thoughtfully. "Some treasures are meant to be discovered at exactly the right moment." We returned to the cabin for lunch on the deck, the October sun warming us against the autumn chill. As Eleanor helped me prepare a salad, Daniel explored the bookshelves, pulling out a leather-bound volume. "Mom, is this Grandpa's old photo album? I haven't seen this in years." He brought it to the table, and we spent the afternoon paging through family history. Richard as a young man, Daniel as a tow-headed child, my younger self with dreams still intact. Eleanor listened attentively as we shared stories, occasionally asking questions that revealed her genuine interest in understanding our family's journey. "I should have these digitized," Daniel said, carefully turning brittle pages. "Future generations should know where they came from." The casual reference to future generations caught my attention. I glanced at Eleanor, who met my gaze with a small smile but said nothing. As the weekend drew to a close, Daniel and Eleanor packed their car for the return to Asheville. The visit had been healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not just the continued mending between Daniel and me, but the glimpse of his future taking shape, one built on healthier foundations than his marriage to Brianna. "Next Sunday at my place?" he suggested, hugging me goodbye. "I'll attempt Dad's lasagna recipe, though I make no promises about the results." "I'll bring the garlic bread," I agreed. As their car disappeared down the mountain road, I felt an unfamiliar lightness, not the tentative relief of those first days in the cabin, but something more substantial. Contentment, perhaps. The settled feeling of a life aligned with purpose. Inside, I opened my laptop to review the week's foundation agenda. A new group of women would be moving into the residence on Wednesday. The financial literacy workshop needed updated materials. The board was considering a partnership with the community college. Perhaps Daniel's new position would create additional opportunities there. Work that mattered. Relationships built on mutual respect. A home that nourished my spirit. All arising from what Brianna had intended as my humiliation and exile. I smiled, remembering Richard's words from his letter. "This is your chance for independence, Lily. Your opportunity to reclaim the dreams you set aside." He could never have imagined just how fully I would embrace that opportunity, or how richly it would bloom. "Are you nervous?" Eleanor asked, adjusting my collar as we stood in the lobby of Asheville's Grand Old Theater. "A little," I admitted. "Public speaking isn't exactly my natural habitat." She smiled, her eyes crinkling warmly at the corners. "You'll be magnificent. Just speak from the heart, as you always do." 2 years had passed since Daniel first brought Eleanor to the cabin. In that time, she had become not just his wife, but my dear friend, her wisdom and compassion enriching both our lives. They'd married in a simple ceremony on the cabin's deck last summer, with Henry proudly walking Eleanor down the aisle and Jane baking the wedding cake. Now we stood in the ornate lobby of the Asheville Theater, surrounded by community leaders and foundation supporters, waiting for the 3rd annual Rose Prescott Foundation Gala to begin. Tonight, we would celebrate the opening of our 3rd residential facility and honor the 64 women who had successfully transitioned through our programs. "Mom!" Daniel approached, handsome in his tuxedo. "They're ready for you backstage." Governor just arrived." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'll be right there." As I made my way through the crowd, accepting good wishes and congratulations, I marveled at how differently I moved through the world now. No longer the shadow in the corner at Brianna's events, but a woman recognized for creating meaningful change, for transforming personal pain into community healing. Backstage, I reviewed my notes one last time. The stage manager handed me a microphone, checking its levels as the master of ceremonies began the introductions. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and executive director of the Rose Prescott Foundation, a woman whose vision has transformed the lives of dozens of women across our state, Lillian Prescott." Applause washed over me as I stepped onto the stage, lights momentarily blinding me before I could make out the faces in the audience. I spotted Daniel and Eleanor in the front row, both beaming with pride. Henry and Jane sat beside them, Henry now serving as the foundation's property manager, Jane running our culinary training program. 3 years ago, I began, my voice stronger than expected. I found myself at a crossroads, displaced from what I'd thought was home, facing an uncertain future, with nothing but a key to a cabin in the mountains and the remnants of my dignity. The audience quieted, leaning in. What I discovered in that cabin was not just shelter, but purpose. Not just a new beginning for myself, but the opportunity to create new beginnings for others who had been similarly dismissed, devalued, or discarded. I shared stories of the women we'd helped, Margaret Havens, now running our senior advocacy program. Sophia Wilson, who'd arrived with 2 children and now managed her own small business. Teresa Campbell, who'd left an abusive marriage at 68 and recently published her first book of poetry. These women remind us that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your dreams, your inherent worth, I continued. Age is not an expiration date on possibility. Sometimes our most profound contributions come after our greatest losses. As I spoke, I noticed a late arrival slipping into a seat near the back of the theater. Even from a distance, I recognized the distinctive posture, the carefully styled hair. Brianna. I hadn't seen her since that confrontational evening at the cabin 3 years ago. I paused only briefly before continuing my address, announcing our new initiatives, a scholarship program for older women returning to education, an expanded counseling center, a partnership with local businesses to create employment pathways. Tonight, we celebrate not just what the foundation has accomplished, but the incredible resilience of every woman who has trusted us with her journey, I concluded. Thank you for your support, your belief, and your commitment to creating a community where dignity is not dependent on circumstance, where value is not determined by age or utility, and where second acts are not just possible, but celebrated. The standing ovation that followed carried me through the ceremonial ribbon cutting and the presentation of awards to our program. Graduates. Throughout the evening, I circulated among donors and supporters, sharing our vision for the future, listening to their suggestions and encouragement. I was speaking with the State Director of Social Services when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Brianna standing there, visibly uncomfortable but determined. Lillian, she said formally, you gave an impressive speech. The foundation is clearly thriving. Thank you, Brianna, I replied, genuinely surprised by her presence. It's unexpected to see you here. She glanced around the elegant gathering. I'm back in the area temporarily. Business matters. I saw the event announced in the paper and... She hesitated. I was curious. I nodded, noting the changes in her. The designer dress and perfect makeup remained, but something was different in her eyes. A wariness, perhaps, or the shadow of lessons learned the hard way. Would you like a tour? I offered, choosing grace over grievance. I could show you what the foundation has accomplished. She shook her head quickly. No, I wanted to say that you've done well for yourself. It's impressive what you've built from what happened. From the humiliation she had engineered, she meant. From the cruelty she had inflicted. Thank you, I said simply. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes. Our conversation was mercifully interrupted by Daniel approaching, his expression carefully neutral as he recognized his ex-wife. Brianna, I didn't know you were attending. Just briefly, she replied, her composure slipping slightly. I should go. Congratulations to you both. As she walked away, disappearing into the crowd, Daniel turned to me with concern. Are you okay? I could have intercepted her. I'm fine, I assured him, surprised to realize it was true. She has no power to hurt me anymore. Later that night, after the gala concluded with pledges exceeding our funding goals, I returned to the cabin alone. Daniel and Eleanor had offered to drive me, but I'd wanted the quiet time to process the evening's events, especially the unexpected encounter with Brianna. The cabin welcomed me with familiar comfort. Lights I'd left on timers, the subtle fragrance of the season's first fire in the hearth that morning, the gentle tick of the grandfather clock Richard had installed during one of his secret visits. I changed into comfortable clothes and made a cup of chamomile tea, carrying it out to the deck where the night sky spread above me, stars brilliant in the clear mountain air. Rose's emerald ring caught the soft light from the cabin as I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders against the October chill. Seeing Brianna had stirred memories, but not in the way I might have expected. I felt no anger, no lingering, hurt, not even satisfaction at how our fortunes had reversed. Instead, I felt something like gratitude for the painful catalyst that had propelled me into this life I would never have chosen, but now couldn't imagine living without. Fits you perfectly, you old woman. Those cruel words, meant to diminish and discard, had instead launched me toward authenticity and purpose. The cabin that was supposed to be my prison had become my liberation. The isolation intended as punishment had fostered community and connection. I thought of the women at tonight's gala, not just those we'd helped, but the donors, volunteers, and board members who had embraced the foundation's mission, women of all ages who understood that true value isn't determined by youth or beauty or wealth, but by the courage to live with integrity, to lift others as you climb, to transform pain into purpose. The cabin had taught me that lesson first. This place Richard had loved, that Rose had protected, that had seemed so worthless to Brianna's calculating eyes. Its true value lay not in the minerals beneath it, though they had provided the means, but in the peace it offered, the perspective it granted, the reminder that what matters most can't be measured in dollars or status. As I sipped my tea beneath the canopy of stars, I felt a profound sense of coming home to myself, not just to this physical place, but to the woman I was always meant to be. Stronger than I'd known, more capable than I'd believed, with gifts I'd never had the opportunity to express. Thank you, I whispered to the night, to Richard, to Rose, even to Brianna and Daniel, all the players in this unexpected journey that had led me here, to this moment of contentment so complete it bordered on joy. The path forward stretched before me, rich with possibility. The foundation would continue to grow, reaching more women, creating more opportunities for transformation. My relationship with Daniel and Eleanor would deepen, perhaps someday, including grandchildren to share the magic of this mountain sanctuary. And I would continue this journey of becoming, not despite my age but because of it, carrying the wisdom of experience, the perspective of loss, the freedom of knowing exactly who I am and what matters most. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's written in a will, but what's discovered in the aftermath of loss. The strength you never knew you had, the purpose you were born to fulfill, the peace that comes from living in alignment with your truest self. The cabin had revealed all of this to me, one day at a time, through seasons of change and growth. The worthless shack had become my most precious possession, not for what lay beneath it, but for what it had awakened within me. Never let someone else decide your value, I murmured to the women we hadn't yet reached, to my younger self, to anyone who might need to hear it. True worth can't be granted or taken away by another. It can only be discovered, claimed, and lived. In the distance, an owl called into the darkness, its voice echoing across the valley. I smiled, wrapped in the perfect belonging of this moment, this place, this life that was finally completely my own.